screen?
Looks good to me.
Okay, I'm going to move to full screen. Still good?
Yep.
Okay, so good afternoon. So I will be discussing in this talk fictitious dynamical effect in quantum field theory, and I'm reporting on the work done with Stanley Brodsky. So it's a basic scientific principle that in an observation of, or in a fundamental description of a physical phenomenon, this description should be independent of arbitrary conventional choices, such as the choice of frame, of the choice of unit system, or the choice of renormalization scheme. And an illustration of this basic scientific principle is Galilean invariance in classical mechanics, which tells us that a fundamental and minimal description is given in inertial frames, and it doesn't depend which inertial frame you choose to make this description. It's always the same. If nonetheless you decide to choose a non-inertial frame, then you have subjective, and by subjective I mean observer-dependent forces like centrifugal forces that arise, and those are called pseudo forces or fictitious forces, and that's the language I'll be using in this talk to describe those subjective effect. So the equivalent of Galilean invariance in quantum field theory is a Poincare invariance, and it's telling us that the physics cannot depend on the Lorentz frame of the observer. So in this talk, I will discuss how just like breaking Galilean invariance yield fictitious dynamics, breaking Poincare invariance in quantum field theory also lead to fictitious effects. So first, the framework that we need to have to discuss Poincare invariance in dynamical system is the Dirac forms of relativistic dynamics. So we'll talk about that a little bit first. And the Poincare symmetry is a symmetry of the full four-dimensional space-time. And the 10 generator of the Poincare group, the 10 symmetries, are the 4 space-time translation, the 3 spatial rotation, and the 3 Lorentz boost. So Poincare symmetry is a dynamical symmetry, meaning that when you apply the symmetry, you mix space and time. So this means that some of the generator corresponding to the symmetries will involve interaction, and those are called dynamical operators. The most well-known is the Hamiltonian, while other generator will be just a kinematical operator, meaning that they don't include interaction terms. So as we all know, dynamical problems are much more complicated to solve than kinematical ones, especially if you involve QCD. So we should minimize the number of dynamical operators in our description. And Dirac discussed how there are ways to define the 10 generator of the Poincare group so that the interaction are minimally included. So if you define your 10 generator using the usual coordinate system, you obtain what's called the instant form, which is typically used in quantum field theory. And in the instant form, there's 4 dynamical operators, and the other 6 are kinematical operators. If you instead define your generator using the light cone coordinate system, you obtain the front form. And in that case, there's only 3 dynamical operators, and the 7 other ones are kinematical. Now, 3 is the minimum number of dynamical operators you can have among the 10. So the front form is giving you the smallest number possible. Then there's other front form, but they're almost never used, and they involve a larger number of dynamical operators, so we don't need to discuss them. So the instant form is using the usual Cartesian system. It's a system that is familiar to us since early school days, and it's also intuitive due to its non-relativistic nature. So we like to use it, and we conventionally use it in atomic, nuclear, and particle physics. However, we will see that in practice, the instant form is not explicitly Poincare invariant, and using it in relativistic dynamics will induce those type of fictitious dynamical effect. So you can see that immediately by looking at Lorentz boost, which are consist of 3 of the 10 generators of the Poincare group. When you do a Lorentz boost on the instant form, what you do, as you know well, is you rotate the time axis by an angle, rotate in the opposite way the axis toward the z-axis if your boost is in the z direction. So you rotate the z-axis by the same angle, but in the opposite way. And you can see that by doing that, you have defined a z that mixed both t, a z prime that mixed both z and t. So since you're mixing t, you have mixed kinematics and dynamics. So you will have frame dependent, that is fictitious dynamical effect that arise during a Lorentz boost in the instant form. Now, crucially, boosts are required to describe high energy reaction, such as electron-proton scattering. So if you use the instant form description to describe a high energy experiment, you will have a subjective description. The front form is based on the light front coordinate system. The time of the front form is defined as one of the edge of the light cone, and one of the spatial direction is the other edge of the light cone. So the time is called x plus or tau, the front forward time, and the other direction is x minus, and then the 2 other spatial dimensions are the same as in the usual instant form. So the relation between tau, the front form time, and the spatial direction x minus of the front form time, the relation between this vector and the usual tz vector is such that there's the physical description in the instant form and front form cannot be connected by a Lorentz transformation. Now, when you do a Lorentz boost in the front form, you don't mix time and space. What happened during a Lorentz boost in the front form is that you rescale the time axis by a factor, and you rescale also the axis toward which the boost is done by the inverse factor. So there's no mixing, it's a purely kinematical operation, and there's no fictitious dynamics that appear. So using the front form, you will obtain an objective, meaning frame independent, description of high energy phenomenology. So there's a question you may have is that how can the instant form not actually be Poincare invariant, because spatial relativity is one of the 2 building blocks of quantum field theory. So how can it be that it violates Poincare invariance? So strictly speaking, all Dirac forms of relativistic dynamics, including the instant form, are constructed to satisfy the Poincare invariance. However, this symmetry concerns the world line of a 4-dimensional spacetime. So if you want to study the time evolution of a phenomenon in the 3-dimensional space, what you need to do is you need to define a time variable. So essentially, you need to split your 4-dimensional spacetime into a 3-dimensional space plus a 1-dimensional time space, and that's called the space-time foliation. And the choice of foliation is what makes the difference between choosing between the instant form and the front form. So the foliation, as I said, is essentially splitting a 4-dimensional space into a 3+1 space. And as you know, when you have a space symmetry, this symmetry is not necessarily valid in a subspace of lower dimension. So a simple example of this is a cylinder in a 3-dimensional space. So it has a symmetry around the vertical axis. And now if you look at this symmetry in a smaller space, in a plane, depending on which plane you look at, it may not conserve the symmetry, like for this example, or if you choose another type of plane, you may conserve the symmetry. Now it turned out that the instant form and the or the front form do not strictly satisfy Poincare invariance, and you could have expected that because when you do a dynamical description of a system, you define a time, and time is not a Poincare invariant quantity. So you have to, when you do the foliation, you have to break Poincare invariance. Now, there's, however, different price to pay when you break this Poincare invariance, and the price you pay with the front form is less than the price you pay with the instant form. So let's look at this. So in the instance form, the 10 operators that define the Poincare algebra are the space-time translation. And here I will cross the operator that are not kinematical. So the Hamiltonian is evidently a dynamical operator, but the space translation operator are kinematical. Likewise, the spatial rotation are also kinematical operators, but none of the boosts are kinematical operator. So the operator, the space translation operator, the rotation around the z-axis, which is important because we usually use the z-axis as the axis of the beam of the reaction. So the z-axis and the boost along the z-axis, they all express symmetry of the 3D space that are essential to describe the high energy phenomenology. So we need to have, so what's happening is when you do a space-time foliation is that you render one of those important operator dynamical, and you lose a crucial simplification for analyzing high energy phenomenology or a relativistic bond state. The dynamical effect that will arise from the boost depends on the boost parameter, that is the frame. So you explicitly violate Poincare invariance when you use such a framework. Now, for the front form, again, the Hamiltonian, as it should be, is a dynamical operator. And like in the instant form, the space translation are also kinematical operator. There's only one of the spatial rotation that is a kinematical operator, the one around the x minus axis, and all the boosts are kinematical operators. So we do not worry about having the Hamiltonian being a dynamical operator. It's what it is good for, and also it does not express a symmetry of the three-dimensional space. And the rotation about the two transverse coordinate of the front form are not typically they are not relevant to high energy scattering, so we do not use them. So the bottom line is that all the operators that are important to describe high energy phenomenology remain kinematical, and for all intent and purpose, the front form dynamics is effectively Poincare invariant. So if you want to use an image, you can go back to this example of a cylinder, and when you do the foliation that bring up the instant form, you do not conserve or you do not preserve an important symmetry of the problem, while when you do the foliation in the front form, you preserve the important symmetry of the problem. So to summarize, in the instant form, boosts are dynamical, so they induce frame-dependent dynamics. We call that fictitious or pseudo-dynamics, just like centrifugal forces in classical dynamics. In the front form, the boosts are purely dynamical. There's no fictitious or pseudo effect arising, and the description is the same in all the frame. So for example, the hadron wave function on the form front are frame independent. Now we could play the devil advocate and say that it's still acceptable to use the instant form because it has advantages. The instant form is more intuitive and more familiar than the front form. And it's even sometimes advantageous to use fictitious forces. For example, when you describe a merry-go-round, it's useful to be in the rotating frame and use centrifugal force, as long as you remember that the centrifugal forces are not fundamental. So that's perfectly acceptable. But this happened to not be true in practice for QCD, because the pseudo forces that arise from non-perturbative QCD, and we all know that it's very hard to compute them. So in the remainder of the talk, I will show some example of how those fictitious effects occur in practice. So for the first couple of examples, I will use a relation called the Gerasimov-Drell-Hern sum rule. And this relation is a fundamental quantum field theory prediction that link the part of the spin-dependent part of the total photo production cross-section that you weight by the photon energy and integrate over the photon energy. And this is related to the spin of the particle studied times the square of its anomalous magnetic moment divided by its mass square. So you don't need to know really what is the GDH sum rule for the example, but it's still better to have in mind what it does. So the sum rule applies to any type of particles, point-like or composite ones alike. As I said, it's a basic quantum field theory relation, and this statement is coming from the fact that the derivation of the GDH sum rule is based on causality, unitarity, Lorentz invariance, gauge invariance, and the physical behavior of the Compton amplitude that underlie the spin-dependent part of the cross-section. And physical behavior just means that this quantity goes to zero at large photon energy, so that we have a finite integral. So the GDH sum rule is always valid unless, of course, the foundation of quantum field theory are wrong. You may have heard that experimentalists have spent a lot of effort testing the GDH sum rule, but apart from testing those assumptions, which the GDH sum rule is not the best tool to test, what we really do when we test the GDH sum rule is not the sum rule itself, but we look for a phenomenon that are not seen at the energy at which the experiment is carried out. When you measure the GDH sum rule, you can't measure it up to an infinite photon energy. You have to have a cutoff here. And if the truncated integral is not equal to its expectation, that means you have missed some important physics. So you can use the GDH sum rule as a tool to probe for physics above the energy limit of your accelerator. And that's what we do when we test the GDH sum rule. We actually don't verify if it's truly working. It has to be working if quantum field theory is correct. So the GDH sum rule was discovered in 1965 and 1966. In 1967, Barton and Dombe computed in the instant form the GDH sum rule for the deuteron, and they found that apparently it's violated. But the same year, McGee and independently Brodsky and Premack pointed out that the problem is not with the GDH sum rule, but the problem is with doing a wrong Lorentz boost. And in the language I'm using in this talk, Barton and Dombe had neglected the fictitious dynamics that arise when you do an instant form boost. So in the year after, Brodsky and Premack derived in the instant form the GDH sum rule using the Betz-Salpeter formalism to get the proper Lorentz boost. And in the language of this talk, they accounted for the fictitious dynamics that arise from the binding between the proton and the neutron. And with this calculation, they found out that the GDH sum rule is valid for the deuteron and composite object. And the conclusion of this work is that we should work always in the front form, where the GDH validity is straightforward. Brodsky and Premack could get away with deriving the GDH sum rule in the instant form only because the bound state is bound by electromagnetism, and we know how to treat QED always. But if you use the front form, the instant form with QCD, then those type of fictitious dynamic are not tractable because QCD, non-perturbative QCD is too hard to solve. So the details of this work are the following. First, you have a boost that appears because the particle here, the deuteron that you study is hit by the probing photon, including photon of infinite energy, since the integral goes all the way to infinity. The Bethe-Salpeter formalism gives the proper instant form boost, and he mixed the electromagnetic interaction in the deuteron with the kinematical transformation. What Barton and Dombey had assumed was that the proton and the neutron could be independently boosted, and by assuming that, they neglected the dynamical and the kinematical mixing. So because of this mixing, there's a fictitious spin orbit force that appears during the proper instant form boost. And the physical origin of this is that the Lorentz boost is mixing triplets and the singlet state of the deuteron, but only the triplet state will coupled with electromagnetic field. So we have a spin orbit force that appears. This spin orbit force is proportional to the magnetic field induced by the boosted charge of the body moving in the external field. So this spin orbit force is frame dependent, and that's why we can call it fictitious. So this makes the energy of the external field to be boost dependently converted into deuteron internal energy, because the spin one can couple with the triplet state can couple with external field, but not the spin zero. So the instant form boost has induced an apparent dynamical modification of the system, and the internal energy has been affected. Again, we can have an easy classical analogy where fictitious forces are mixed with potential energy. For example, when you mix the kinetic energy in an inertial frame, you can, if you look at it in the rotating frame, you convert this energy into the repulsive energy of the centrifugal force. So that's the first example of fictitious effect. Yes.
5 minutes, please.
Okay. That's the first example of fictitious force arising. We can use the GDH sum rule to show another example. There's actually several ways to derive this relation, and one of them is using the instant form. And when you derive the GDH sum rule using instant form current algebra, you don't obtain the actual sum rule. You have the sum rule plus an extra term that explicitly violate Lorentz invariance, because it involves the energy of the proton, which is not a Lorentz invariance. Now you recover the proper sum rule by taking this relation into the infinite momentum frame, which is often the case for instant form calculation. If you boost them to the infinite momentum frame, you fall back on the form front result. But it's not acceptable to have to choose a specific frame in order to describe a fundamental property of a particle. So another example of fictitious effect are the high energy pancakes. Those are often invoked in electron-proton deep inelastic scattering or relativistic heavy-ion collision. The Lorentz contraction is evidently subjective since it depends on the observer motion relative to the contracted object. So it's not an intrinsic property of the object, and you cannot and should not use it to explain, for example, Bjorken scaling, as we hear sometimes. Furthermore, the Lorentz contraction is not observable in an actual scattering experiment because of the Terrell-Penrose effect. The Lorentz contraction would be observable only if the finite size object can be observed at a single fixed time, which either violate causality or require an impossible experiment to do. In fact, the pancake, the Lorentz contraction is not present in the frame independent Ford from description. And the last example I would like to give is related to the complexity of the vacuum in the instant form. So the front form vacuum is trivial, and the reason for that is because all the particle needs to have a positive momentum, but vacuum fluctuation require that one of the particle has a negative momentum because of momentum conservation. So the form dynamics forbid vacuum fluctuation. In the instant form, the vacuum complexity arises from the fact that in the instant form dynamics, you have space-like events, and those can be either causally linked in some given frame, but then if you boost this frame and go to another frame, then you find that those causally linked events become acausal. You have Z graph. And then unitarity demands that those causality violating Z diagram, which have negative probability amplitude, need to be compensated by some other graph, and that's how the vacuum polarization are required in the instant form. So if you compute the vacuum expectation value in the instant form, you find that the vacuum energy is 120 order of magnitude too large compared to what we expect. So we see that the instant form complex vacuum is a fictitious mechanism that arises to preserve causality, which would otherwise be broken by using a Poincaré violating instant form dynamics. So again, you have parallel in classical mechanics where fictitious energies arise to preserve fundamental principles such as energy conservation. So a consequence of this realization is that there's no vacuum condensate, only in-hadron condensate, and those contribute to hadron masses and not to the cosmological constant. So this big discrepancy between the QFT estimate of the cosmological constant and what is currently observed is possibly of fictitious origin. The last example I want to give quickly is again involving the complex vacuum. In the instant form, you have the Z graph, the causal Z graph that I mentioned previously. So you need also to have a vacuum bubble to compensate for their negative amplitudes. And this creates a very difficult problem to solve where the hadronic current involves vacuum and both vacuum and Bound state wave function. In contrast, in the front form, you have a trivial vacuum, a causal description, and the current is simply a function of the Bound state wave function only. So to summarize, a fundamental description of relativistic dynamics must always be done with an effectively Poincaré invariance framework. Otherwise, fictitious effect arises that complicate the description of the system. It would provide a non-minimal description. The description will be subjective, meaning frame dependent, or dependent on the frame of the observer, and may lead to misleading concepts such as pancakes, relativistic pancake. And in general, those systems are harder to compute. The Poincaré invariance of the instant form or the front form is spoiled by the foliation of the four-dimensional space-time into a 3+1 dimensional space and time. But in the instant form, the important operator to describe the energy scattering are affected by this foliation, while in the front form, the important operator remain kinematical. So effectively, the front form can be thought as being Poincaré invariant. So just like in classical physics, when you break Galilean invariance, you induce fictitious effect. Breaking Poincaré invariance creates also fictitious effect, and I gave a few examples of them: an extra spin orbit force in the deuteron structure, or an extra scattering force in elastic scattering. It leads to those misleading pancakes, and to a complex instant form vacuum that complicate calculation of hadron structure and also predict a very large cosmological constant. Thank you.
Very much, Alexander. Are there any questions or comments for this presentation?
Yuximi, do you think we will meet the problem for the initial condition problem? Because T plus Z should be giving right all the different places.
If it can be a problem for the initial condition, I didn't.
Yes, yes.
So the it is a problem in the sense that in the instant form,
Mm-hmm.
you need your initial condition to be known at instant time, which is a causal. So you start from a non-physical description. In the front form, it's not a problem because the initial condition are at fixed light front time, so it's not a causal.
Alexandra, when you speak about pancakes, do people actually use pancake notions in calculations, or are they only used to illustrate some point they're trying to make?
It's a good point. I've seen them used in phenomenological calculations, but I don't recall seeing them in very formal calculations. So you may be right that maybe there's no, we should not hit too hard on the pancake if they're just using them as a picture, but we still should not use it as a picture.
Yeah, I think that's a valid point, that they shouldn't use it as a picture. And they certainly shouldn't use it as a calculational tool. I'm just trying to work out whether they're making two mistakes or one.
Yes, and as I said, so I'm not a practitioner of heavy ion physics, but I did read some lecture, for example, where they're using the pancake form, and that leads to some nonsense description at the end. But as I said, those are just lectures; they're not formal calculations. So I've seen them used, but not very formally. So and I agree, it's a good point.
Very good. Are there any other comments before we move on? We have some more time later in the discussion, but Stanley, you would like to say something, please.
It's hard to add more. I think you did a wonderful job in the talk. I'm just going to comment that when you think about the Drell-Yan West formula for form factors, that's in front form. And what the trick is that it's not only that you use the front form where the light front wave functions are frame independent, but you also use the frame where Q plus is equal to 0. And that means that the photon or the graviton, if you're doing gravitational form factors, doesn't have any pair production. So everything in the dynamics is in the proton, if you're doing the proton form factor. If you used any other solution, like with Q plus positive, then the photon is bringing in pairs, and that totally confuses the physics. So one of the great advantages of the front form is you can isolate the physics of the hadron directly in the light front wave function and in formulas like the electromagnetic and proton form factors, gravitational form factors from the Drell-Yan West organization. So I think that's a very important point. Also, what you're doing in the front form is you're setting boundary conditions at fixed light front time. So that means it's like taking a flash photograph. It's actually what you really do in an experiment. If you do deep elastic electron scattering, the photon is seeing the proton at one fixed light front time. On the other hand, if you use instant form, it's totally confusing. You can't really even imagine how you do it because you're violating causality. You're saying you can specify a boundary condition at one time over a finite space, and that violates causality. So really the front form is really, in addition to all the things that Alexander said, it's also causal and frame independent. and has all the right organization things. Also, in the case of the, I don't know if it came up in the previous talk, but B of 0 equals 0 is a fundamental theorem, Kuhn, of the gravitational form factors. That B of 0, the anomalous gravito-magnetic moment, has to be 0, and that's explicit in the front form, and it's true for every Fock space, Fock state, in fact. So it's such a powerful formalism that I think it's the only way, in fact, we can really do consistent calculations, which are causal, frame independent, and don't involve fictitious physics like Alexander is specifying.
Very good, thank you. At this point, I think we should move on. We can come back to some of these issues in half an hour. So again, Alexander, thank you.